people in as we go. I'm Michelle Sullivan. I think everybody knows me, and I would, as we continue to have people here, I just invite everybody to put your name and your organization in the chat, just so that everybody kind of has a sense of who's in the room. So we had started this concept of Leaders Learning Network last spring, and then Omicron hit and everything sort of went all over the place. So this is our first attempt to really begin to kind of get things going again. And the purpose of the Learning Leaders Network is kind of the idea that all of you are such remarkable thinkers and supports for one another. And we wanted to create some space where we had the opportunity for peers to learn from peers across organizations. And so this is our first series in trying to do this. This is the first of 3 for this fall. The next session will be on powerful partnerships, where we'll have an opportunity to hear both from district leaders and from organizations working with districts to think about how we can do a better job of creating partnerships. And then next we'll have a program on elevating young people's voices, and really looking forward to hearing from some of the organizations in the state that are doing some interesting and innovative work in that regard. One thing I would really invite is for all of you to think about what are the things that are keeping you up at night, or that that you would like to talk with your peers about, and so that as we continue to do these, that it's really meaningful to the work that you're doing and how we can continue to help support you in your development of supports for young people across the state. I'm looking at my notes, by the way, over here. One thing I would invite too is that as you're listening to both Julia and Joey, jot down questions or comments or things that were striking for you, that we can have time at the very end for conversation and questions. So the way we're structuring these, just so you kind of have a sense, is we've invited Julia, who I'll introduce here in a minute, to kind of give a broad context about trauma-informed practice and research, just a kind of reminder, because all of you are all well-versed, and at the same time, just to kind of give some context. And then we'll hear from Joey Burke, who will talk about how she's taking that concept and putting it in practice. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with each of these sessions, is to kind of give the broad research, and then to then talk about how it's working on the ground and what lessons learned are coming from that. One additional thing I'll mention is that we've hired a wonderful writer, a couple of writers, who will also take the topics of these sessions and put together a little brief that we can send out more broadly, that will have additional information and resources for practitioners after the fact. So with that, I'm going to do an introduction and get off the screen and get on to our wonderful presenters today. So Julia Cathy graduated with her master's degree in social work from the University of Wyoming. Through her schooling experience, she participated in emotional regulation research with the Boys and Girls Club, while also working with junior high and high school students as a school social work intern. Both programs were located in Cheyenne. And while she was attending, and she did this as she was attending the university in Laramie. Through these projects, Julia found a deep passion for trauma-informed work, especially with students in Wyoming school districts, and found that rural practice was particularly exciting and hard work, but with a lack of readily available resources for many of our families and children. I'm sure a lot of you can really relate to that. She's worked with a wide variety of students and found emotional regulation and trauma-informed practices to be a priority in providing holistic care to adolescents that really made a difference in working with students. She's excited and honored to be sharing what she's been learning, and we're really glad to have you here, Julia. And I'll quickly just introduce Joey as well, so that we can have them hand off to one another. Shortly after earning her bachelor's degree in family and consumer sciences from the University of Wyoming, Joey accepted a position as the Rural Runaway and Homeless Youth Program coordinator at Fremont County Group Homes. It was here that she started her journey in trauma-informed practices. In April 2012, she became a certified trauma-informed care trainer from the University of Oklahoma. For the past 10 years, Joey has assisted several youth serving programs in transitioning into using a trauma-informed approach. And currently, she is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Douglas. And this position has really given her an opportunity to take a more preventative approach by educating youth in resiliency skills. And I'm just delighted to have you both here. And I will, Julia, turn it over to you. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. All right. Let's see. As it loads. As Michelle had said, I think a lot of the information that I'm going to have here today is stuff we're all really familiar with or have some kind of contextual knowledge of. I thought it would just be nice to give kind of like an overview, explain trauma-informed care, and some stuff that I gathered from like the CDC, along with a really great book. So first, when we talk about trauma, I think just this simple explanation that it's an event or series of events that cause moderate to severe stress reactions and is understood as traumatic events. So a lot of times it's categorized by these feelings that we have: horror, helplessness, injury, the threat of injury, and it's this state of hyper awareness and this impact of stress. And oftentimes, I think we can forget that this trauma can affect not only the person experiencing this, but also friends, relatives, and even us as professionals hearing the trauma, kind of that secondhand that goes with it as these traumatic experiences happen. And, we talk about trauma, and a really significant research that we've probably all heard of is the ACEs study. The ACEs study is that the research that happened when we talked about childhood experiences, and especially with teenage years, that puts children at risk for violence or chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance abuse into adulthood. This is a really great triangle here that I think has helped me understand it a lot. When we talk about the ACEs study, there's different things that may happen through childhood and through adolescence that you get a point for on the ACEs study. And how many points you have can often lead further up this triangle. So we see that this impact of trauma really has an expansive effect on adolescents through adolescent to adulthood. There's that risk of social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, and further up as you go, it can even lead to early death. And this is all research that's been combined and brought together through different agencies. And I know that this information that I got specifically was from the CDC. And this quote I really liked from that, just adverse childhood experiences, those ACEs, they have a tremendous impact on the future violence, victimization, and perpetration and lifelong health opportunity. But by working together and by having these conversations, even just like this, I think that it's a really great step in addressing the trauma that has been happening with so many of our young people, to change the things that are happening directly in our community, because we know how big connection plays in healing from events like this. And another piece that I really kind of wanted to bring up, and I'm sure Joey will go into it more, is just how trauma affects our brain. We see, and as research keeps coming and we learn more about trauma, I think we just continuously learn how much we don't know and how many things we don't understand why it affects what happens with trauma. But we do see that the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex are really impacted by trauma. The ability to regulate, retrieve our memories, understand our emotions. And we see that this prolonged stress and intensely stressful moments will create actual pathways that makes it difficult to control or regulate our emotions. So we have to learn how to rewire those so that way we can change how we think, feel, and act around certain situations compared to the traumatic experiences that we have. And this quote I really like, as long as the mind is defending itself against invisible assaults, our closest bonds are threatened, along with our ability to imagine, plan, play, learn, and pay attention to other people's needs. I think that this plays so well into what so many young people are experiencing, is that as they're trying to address this trauma, these things that have happened, it's these assaults that keep happening in our mind and in our brains that affects how we interact and would live day to day on a normal basis. And then this last slide that I have here is just kind of, I think, an approach that we can all talk about, and an approach that kind of sets it out in a nice way. You know, we need to talk about safety and the peer support, the collaboration that happens, and trustworthiness. You know, I think that this is a really great little infographic that can kind of explain trauma-informed care and why being trauma-informed and understanding trauma, the impact it has on the brain, is so important. And then these are here. And then, yeah, this is the book. I'm not sure how many of you have read it, but I know it's a book that we had read through college. The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And that's where that quote had come from. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of what we wanted to talk about in relation to trauma. And I'll go ahead and let Joey take it from here.
All right, I'm going to transition real quick. Okay, you guys can see my screen? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Uh-oh, hold on a minute. There we go. So my journey started, I would go ahead and say right when I graduated from college. I was very invested in working with youth. I wanted to make a difference. And my first job right out of college was an independent living coordinator, where I was working with kids that were in state's care. So those were the foster care kids and the kids that were on probation. And at that time, I would say there was very little involvement in the trauma-informed care approach. We've come a long ways in that short time, or in this time frame. So I remember I would have to do these intakes with these kids, and I pretty much was asking every horrible question I could ask them, and they would just tell me everything. And I was sitting there just baffled that these things actually occurred in people's homes. I was completely naive. And then I had a suicidal kid on my hands because I made them go through all this trauma. And I kept thinking, there has to be something better. There has to be something better. So 6 years later, I finally accepted another position with Fremont County Group Homes. And it was a federal grant. And at that time, the federal grant was requiring us to become a trauma-informed care program. So when we were in Washington, D.C., we had this great training on trauma-informed care. And I was very, very excited because they were explaining what was happening with these kids who had experienced these extreme traumas. They would show the pictures of the brains. They would show their normal or their behaviors that we're sitting there labeling them as bad children because this is how they're behaving, and looking at really what they're doing with their lives. And I was like, yes, this is exactly what I want. So into the training the question was, well, wait a second, how do you transition your program into that? I understand the trauma and I understand the science in the brain, but there was really nothing explaining how do we change our practices. So we had them come out to Wyoming, and same training. At the end of the training, same exact reaction. We're like, wait a second, what are we supposed to exactly do? We were very frustrated. We were very excited. We wanted to move towards that direction. And my supervisor calls me one day and she says, you're going to become a trauma-informed care trainer. And I simply said, no, I don't train people. And she goes, yes, you do. And I am so grateful that she gave me that opportunity. I sat through very intense training on it, and probably about the fifth day, a light bulb went on, and I went, okay, I need to teach them coping skills. I need to teach them resiliency. I need to teach them how to recognize what's going on with their body and how to change that wiring. So from that day forward, I pretty much started working with several youth organizations and putting those practices into place. I kind of forgot to do those on my screen. So I was actually trained in 2012. And I will tell you, when I first started doing the trauma-informed care training for other facilities, and I would talk about deep belly breathing and different coping skills, people were still stuck in that, well, if the kid has gone through abuse, the only thing we need to do is send them to a counselor. Or you should have them journal. They weren't really thinking outside the box of other ways that the kids could learn to deal with their trauma. So I definitely, the first several years was a rough start. And it took a while for everyone to start hearing about the ACEs study and what was going on, and that there was hope. Because I think there for a very long time, we kind of would look at these kids who have gone through tremendous trauma that there's really nothing we can do, and they're probably going to end up in prison. I don't know how many times I heard they're either going to be in jail or in prison by the time they're 18. That was kind of the mindset. So this is a little story about a young man in our program. This is what trauma looks like, a pretty extreme case. This little guy came to our program starting in kindergarten. He was typical normal little boy, he always had a Hot Wheels car in his pocket. He was happy, easygoing, never really had any problems. And then one day his world turned upside down. He was placed in foster care. His dad was arrested. He was split away from his other sibling, who was his main caretaker, his older sister. And all of a sudden we started having extreme behaviors with him. A lot of times we were on top of it and we would say, did you sleep? And he would say no. And we're like, do you want a pet pillow? And he was asleep in 2 seconds. This day we didn't catch it, or maybe it had just built up. And so I was called to our life skills room, and I had to have the teacher clear that room with all the other kids in there. He was going from outlet to outlet, ripping out anything. He was shoving over chairs. He was shoving over tables. And I had to call in my other manager, or unit director, and we both sat there and we were both like trying to calm him down. We were like, what can we do? Let's talk. He was not responding to us, and I was furious. I'm going to just tell you this. I've been trained in trauma-informed care, but in this time period, I'm like, he's destroying my room. What is he doing? And then you kind of see in that last picture, actually the last two, he has a roll of masking tape. And I remember sitting there going, he's buying me masking tape because he's wasting masking tape. I was just so mad, and I stopped and I was like, what? Why are you thinking like this? And once I started breathing and calming down, all of a sudden he did. And he ended up under one table. And he started calming down because he started doing a repetitive activity, and that was doing the masking tape over all the legs. And at that point in time, I was like, he is doing this because of trauma that was going on. Once he calmed down, this probably took, I'm going to say 15 minutes before he calmed down completely. And he started telling us that he was in jail, that he made himself a jail cell because he's a bad boy. Okay, so that was what I had to deal with. I'm going to kind of go through and talk about what we do, what we put in place here at the Boys and Girls Club, and then I'm going to circle back and tell you what the consequences with him were. But I kind of wanted you guys to know that story. So we have a two-way approach. The first one is staff. I have learned in my many years of doing this, if you don't have staff buy-in, you're going to struggle with this really bad. And it needs to come from the top. If the top doesn't understand what trauma-informed practices are, you're going to struggle with that. My staff are all trained in trauma-informed care, whether they like it or not. They do usually drag their feet, and then they really like it. And then we're always doing some kind of activity. Currently, we have a little book club going on. One of the things we require, and this has nothing to do with the trauma-informed care, but it's our power hour, is we require the kids to read 15 minutes every day. So I was like, why are we required to read 15 minutes every day? And I came across this really wonderful book. I think everyone should read it. And it's called Upward Spiral. And it talks about what's going on in your brain when life, you experience things in life, and how you can either choose two paths. You can go down or you can go up. And it's simple stuff like watching your sleep schedule, smiling at people, thinking of funny, good stories, simple things that the staff can teach. If they have those tools, they can teach the kids. Gratitude's another one. So staff, every staff meeting on Fridays, we do some activity that is around developing ourselves in that area so that we can manage our stress, have our own coping skills so that we can actually teach our youth that. The other piece is the youth piece, and our biggest one where we really push is prevention. Those pictures just happen to take place in our life skills room. One of the programs that we run in our life skills room, which I have actually taught in several of the schools here in Wyoming, is Mind Up. It's from the Goldie Hawn Foundation. And the reason I really love this book is because right off the bat, they talk about the mind. It talks about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex in a way that the kids actually understand what those parts of the brain is doing. Once they kind of have that knowledge, sometimes it's easier to work with the kids and you can explain what's going on instead of them just having those feelings or those emotions, but it lets them become more self-aware. The other program, which is a BGCA program that we use, is called Smart Moves, and it talks about emotions and regulation. And then the other part is our consequences. Every day we're dealing with some incidents, and some of them are trauma related. Several of them are trauma related, I'm going to just say that. And then some of them are just behavior things. But either way, we use a program or a group of sheets that are called think sheets. And what these think sheets do is make the kids sit down and think about, they have to discuss what did they do? How were they feeling before they did that? What was that choice? What made them feel that way? How it hurt someone else? How it hurt themselves? What a better choice would be? And then how are they going to fix it? So we frequently walk through the kids. Let's say, if they hit someone, well, they say, well, I was mad before I hit someone. Why were you mad? Because he called me a jerk. Okay, so how did that hurt the other person? Hitting them. How did it hurt you? And then what's a better way to deal with it? So that they actually have those solutions so they're not always in that reaction period. The other nice thing about this is you can do a think sheet with the kid, and then you can go out on the floor and you kind of see them getting ready to do that same behavior, and you can say, hey, Johnny, let's talk about that. What was the other choice we decided would be better? And so it's easier to help re-guide them instead of always having to say, don't do this, it's kind of letting them make that decision while they're out there. So I'm going to go back to the young boy who tore my room apart. We went through the think sheet. He destroyed property was what he chose. The reason he chose that was because he's sad and he's angry and he's confused. So he marked all these emotions, okay? And the reason for marking all those emotions is he doesn't understand what's going on. He misses his sister. He misses his mom. He doesn't understand why he has to live somewhere else, okay? We kind of talked about better things to do. And one of the things we had him do was listen to the Angry Octopus, which is a relaxation kind of story. So what he learned in that was when he gets angry, instead of tearing a room apart, he tightens his toes and his fists and relaxes them. He tightens his arms and relaxes them. He tightens his legs. So it kind of walks him through that process so he understands he needs to self-regulate. The other thing is he had to come in and clean the room. We had several staff that wanted to start picking up the room, and I was like, no, he has to do the whole entire room by himself. And when he went through that process, he kept saying, I'm sorry, I won't do this. And so I think for him, that punishment made him realize that he made a big mess. And he regretted it, I guess. The other question that came in to play is 2 days later, we were supposed to have a field trip to a ranch here just outside of Douglas. And staff was asking, does he really get to go on the field trip? And I said yes. Because one thing that we like to do is once these kids cause behaviors or do these things, we want to punish them long term. And I am grateful I didn't hold them back off of that field trip. And the reason for this was I was able to watch him in an environment where he flourished. He would get down and he would talk to the horses and the cows. And you all of a sudden saw this connection that he had. And when I came back, I called his wraparound counselor and I said, he needs to go into horse therapy. He started horse therapy and he has flourished again. So he's able to cope with the stuff. So I think my thought on that is that be careful when we're choosing consequences that the crime fits the punishment or the punishment fits the crime. If a kid is out smoking and we say, okay, you're going to rake all the leaves, that's not really a connection to what they're doing, or tearing a room apart and then just taking away other opportunities from them. So, okay. Do you guys have questions, I think?
Joey, I have a question and it's based on something you had said when we spoke before. You talked about in transitioning your staff that you actually lost some staff. And I'd be curious about that and what that looked like for you and your organization.
Yeah, so when I showed up to the club, this was kind of the process that was put in place. So if a child misbehaved, we all have walkies on, and there was not an earpiece, but the walkie was on. And so every class would hear, Johnny, bad call, right? So the whole club knew Johnny just got in trouble. And so they would have to fill out this bad call sheet, which was basically saying, I did something I wasn't supposed to. And if they had 3 bad calls, they were sent home. So it was an easy way for the staff that didn't want to deal with the challenges to get those kids kicked out within the first 15 minutes of them being here. And so I had to real quick say, first of all, we do not call out bad calls. And second of all, I'm not sending kids home just because they're misbehaving all the time. And so a lot of them did not like that transition that we actually had to teach them new ways to behave. And so they left the organization. And I have to say, it was scary there because I'm like, oh no, everyone's leaving. But I will tell you, my staff I have right now, they're phenomenal. And I'm not the one that has to do all the trauma-informed care stuff now. They're picking up, I'll catch them if a kid's having a screaming fit. I will catch one of my staff knelt down next to them talking about how to blow the coffee or the hot cocoa, different techniques to teach the kids that there's better ways to deal with what they're going through. Did I answer that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Other questions?
I guess I just got a quick question. I thought this was super informative. One thing that I would love to, if I guess this is a question for both of you, is there additional reading or resources that maybe you could pop into chat that we could then maybe pull up and archive so we can have those handy? I think especially where we are headed is a lot of sort of kind of intro social emotional learning programming, or kind of the ancillary programming around it. So the more that I can dive into this stuff, I think would be useful. So that way we could tell our partners, all about this.
My first recommendation is that Mind Up program. It goes into mindfulness, it explains so much, and it has it on multiple youth levels. And there's a lot of activities. It's not boring, but I think that is like the best place to start, and it's cheap. I think I bought each of the books for $10, and I have three of the books. So it's not like a really costly program, but I would be more than happy to. It's hard because I like the brain, I'm kind of a brain geek, so I like the science stuff. So I have to be very careful not to always pass that stuff on, but I will come up with a list of resources that have been extremely helpful.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And Tyler, we'll send materials out after the call as well so that everybody has what was referenced as well.
Okay, thank you.
Brooke, did you have a question? You looked like you were.
I'm thinking. So what I'm thinking about too is we've been having conversations, our executive team, just about staff health and wellness, and just thinking about secondary trauma and the way that has the potential to impact our staff if they're not healthy and well, because we work with some families that, have experienced some terrible, terrible things, the kids and even the parents. And knowing that there's that vicarious trauma piece, we've really been focusing on looking at resources for our staff. So, and a lot of it, I think, comes down to just educating them on, burnout, risk of burnout, secondary trauma, and all the self-care pieces that go into that. So I'm going to be meeting with my coordinators later this week on Friday morning, and we're just going to look at, there's like a professional quality of life survey, and it's free online as long as you don't tailor or alter it. But it seems to be one that's pretty popular in terms of measuring compassion satisfaction, because if you're good at this work or you're in this work, because let's be honest, it's not about really big bucks and lots of money. It's because you're a caregiver at heart and you like working with hopefully with kids and families. Otherwise you're not going to stay in it long because it's hard work. But so it looks at compassion satisfaction, and there's measures to really look at risk of compassion fatigue, burnout, and then secondary trauma. and the whole host of scary stuff that can go along with that. So I just appreciate this. I think it's easy for staff, number one, to get focused on behaviors and not see what's behind that behavior. And then I also think once you can start getting staff past that, there's that piece just about making sure that, they recognize the importance of taking care of themselves and not allowing trauma to negatively impact them, or if it is, to connect with resources with supervisors and whatnot. So this was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
I'm going to go ahead and just add to that. I am always working with my staff. It's not always focused on the kids. And when I'm training them, one of the things we do is a life wheel. And I have them go through the life wheel and they kind of rate where they're at in each section of life. And the goal is to have it round because, if you have relationships up high, but finances are way low, that doesn't roll with life. And if they don't have a balanced life, then what comes into the club? Do you know what I mean? So when we sit down and do our goals at twice a year, they can have goals in those personal areas because their personal life impacts just as much in the club as outside the club. So I think those are really important.
Could you send that out? I'm curious because it's interesting you bring that up because I was looking at something similar. I was looking at like what SAMHSA uses for like the wellness wheel and just the domains of life. I'd love to see which one you're using, and it sounds like it's helpful.
Yeah, I'll send you what I'm using, and that's. And I think the other thing, one of my favorite activities, I kind of want to do the activity real quick. Can we do one?
Yeah.
Okay. In the chat, I want you guys to put how kids cope. Just go ahead and bombard it. What do they do to cope with things in life? You have drawing, friendships, cry, talk, explode, talk through, play, zone out, yes they do, act out, role play, listen to music, disconnect through social media, nap, escape into games and video. Okay, next question. What do adults do to cope? And be honest, don't give me the list of pray, meditate, be honest. They eat, drink what? Nap, wine, yep. Watch bad TV, escape to social media, self-medicate, withdraw, escape. Nature, okay, I will give you that one. Walks, work out, drink alcohol. Okay, the reality is we have really horrible coping skills. And I will admit, I have some too. I have moments where, I have 3 grants to write and a couple grant reports, and I had an incident last night. I had a board meeting. I had an incident last night. I had to call law enforcement to deal with a child. I mean, all I wanted to do was go drink. And I'm just going to be honest. I'm like, I have to go to this board meeting. We all have really bad coping skills usually. It's easier to pick up a glass of wine than to exercise. It's easier to jump on the phone and complain to 5 people what's going on than to meditate and come up with a plan to deal with it. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why I say staff has to buy in. Staff has to be willing to cope with their own stuff and to be role models. So I think it's a two-way process.
So what's the carrot, I guess? What we've bumped into in the past is we certainly have seen staff burnout and staff overwork and kind of bandwidth limitations, and we haven't really found that really good carrot to incentivize them sometimes to like learn, you know, new methodology or take time to invest in something in order to kind of push through it, myself included. I think does your team start to overcome that and maybe incentivize
So
more folks?
we did a couple things. So I wrote extra grants to get some extra funds in here. And the reason for that was so that I could have my staff earlier in the day. And so we could focus on training and also to focus more on positive things that we want to do here in the club. The other thing is I really want each of my staff members to bring in their talents and the stuff that they're really excited about in life. And I have one that is an incredible crocheter. She said, "Hey, can we buy the supplies, teach the teams how to crochet?" I said, "Yes, that's great." So she did it. She offered it up to the teams. The teams weren't very big in it. She's like, "Can I offer it to the younger kids?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." She has little first, second graders in there, boys and girls, might I add. And they are doing that. There's some of those kids that have picked up that talent. Now there'll be another kid that wants nothing to do with crocheting and just wants to do the science experiments. So the teacher that's in our STEM program, she loves to do experiments. And so for them to be able to have that opportunity to share their passions, what they're excited about, makes their job a lot better. And it allows them to connect really well with those kids that like that as that coping skill.
That's great. I appreciate both avenues. Just super quick, Michelle, sorry, I saw you interrupted you. Were the grants that your team explored, were they like local, statewide, national? I love the idea of these little incentives. We've tried to bribe people with food, and that goes so far. But I agree, being able to, compensate them or support additional programming through, small grants that maybe would help fund the materials for a crochet program, for example, would be really, I think, would
Right.
resonate.
So we kind of do both. We work with some of the energy companies and have asked them to help support those extra activities. And then, of course, like Wyoming Community Foundation, some of the banks have like their own foundations that they have some of the grants. So, it's just kind of, that little extra $5,000 goes a long ways when you're trying to do that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kate, I'm trying to remember when our next grant deadline is for the Community Foundation too, by the way.
They just changed it.
Share it in the chat.
Yeah. Julia, I'm curious, as you listen to Joey's presentation and as you think about your work and your research last year, if there's anything that was really coming up for you or experiences that you've had working with young people and adolescents that you'd want to offer up as well.
Yeah, well, actually to your last question, Tyler, you're in Laramie, is that right? This might be kind of out of the box, but something that I think about a lot is this piece of connection, not only for people that we're working with, but also like the employees that we're working with, and having an incentive as just maybe some fun, like going on a hike. That might make a big difference and bring a lot of connection to team members. And that's something that like I know I would probably want to do. Just do something that's both like healthy and a coping mechanism, but also together to bring in that piece of connection. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and through like this last year with research, and a lot of my schooling was affected by COVID, and that piece of connection was so huge for all of the people I was working with in my practicum experience, in the research that I did with emotional regulation last year, and also with myself and my colleagues and peers and things that we were encountering in our everyday life. And I know that connection also has a big impact on our traumas. When we feel connected and when we feel supported, we're able to tap into those strengths and that resilience that we have. But it has to be recognized. Like, we have to feel connected and supported. That was just something that I wanted to add as a new young person out in the field. I know connection plays a big piece in my life. But yeah, so some of the stuff that I got to do last year that was really cool, that I think ties into what Joey was saying, is that when our young kiddos don't really understand what's happening with their bodies, they can't understand the impact of trauma. And with emotional regulation, I think when something that I was just thinking about is, think about the first time you throw up, right? You probably had no idea what was going on. You didn't know why your body was reacting the way it was and why everything felt weird and bad. And I think sometimes we can think about trauma in like that physical sense as well. Things feel really, really big to kiddos who are young because they haven't experienced it before. This idea of having this really big reaction and being so angry, but not really putting the pieces together and connecting those networks that are happening in our brain. When we can recognize that and learn how to, like, okay, if you're feeling angry, so this is maybe some stuff that's happening in your body, or just asking those questions about what is happening in your body, what is the physical reaction, what's going on in your little brain, and just talking about that bodily reaction, I think was really cool pieces that I was learning about that seemed to help a lot of our families and our kids that we were working with. And in the schools too, you know, if I had a kid who was really upset and wanted to throw stuff around, if we could just sit down for a second and be goofy and laugh, then maybe we can address that anger that was there too. Little pieces.
Great. I'm curious about, I mean, we've got pros on the call. Are there other things and strategies from other locations? Any things that are coming up for you as you're thinking about your own practice in your own communities? That moment where you're like,
I think for us, and I know we've just sort of chatted about this a little bit, but maybe this will get some feedback from others as well. The really valuable feedback so far has been super helpful. For us, it's all about staffing. We have so many ideas and so many kind of irons in the fire that we want to do, but then trying to give that to staff or trying to engage outside groups and kind of communicate this has always been the challenge. I'm sure this is not a Wyoming problem, but just it feels like everybody across institutions and across the state, everybody's wearing so many hats that put on another hat on top is kind of tough. I love the idea of community building. And I think I'll start to try and explore those routes as well as some other avenues, but I'm kind of curious what other roadblocks other folks have been bumping into.
I'm just going to say just a little response to that. I think most of my career, I've been on the reaction side of dealing with what's going on, and getting on that prevention side, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, but it's a lot easier. I'm telling you what, I seriously can walk out on the floor and I can be like, okay, hey, we just talked about this. What did we talk about? And then they, instead of it all happening, they kind of being able to be on the other side, even though it seems very daunting, it does make it a lot easier. And I'm seeing a huge increase in the number of kids that are experiencing trauma. And extreme behaviors. And it's not just me, because I'm calling the school and I'm like, what's going on? And they're saying, we don't know either. And so we're all struggling too on that, but it is easier once you get to the other side instead of always feeling like problem.
Yeah, I would say that it's a pretty consistent theme that we're hearing from both districts and from organizations across the state, that we're kind of having to move back at you, that there's the kind of balance of kids with severe or significant behaviors and those kids with that kind of balanced, the stasis is a little bit off right now, that they're just more challenging behaviors, which then, and not as many sort of kids who can help sort of regulate the whole. Well, any other final, I was going to say we scheduled for an hour and a half just in case, but I want to make sure that as we just kind of come up to the top of the hour, anybody have any additional comments, questions, ideas, practices you'll put into place as you think about this? Julia, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I'm debating. I saw Tyler's question there, and I'm just thinking, in the world of somebody who went through COVID in college, because you work with more like college young adult, is that right, Tyler? I think sometimes things feel really hopeless. I think we see a lot more of the problems and things that are happening in our world, and it makes it a lot harder to feel passionate about things, and it makes it a lot harder to connect with what we love, because there's constant news of big things that are constantly happening in our world and making life really difficult. And I don't know what the answer would be, but I'm maybe just empathizing with that and understanding, because I think there's a lot of people who are just really struggling right now and see things so much more just in their face constantly that it can make it hard to feel engaged with anything. But again, I don't know if I have an answer.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think I'll try to connect with you folks offline and see if we can do some creative ways to infuse some of our programming, maybe sneakily, with some of these techniques, such that the students that do want to engage are getting sort of a kind of the sprinkle of support that they need without necessarily explicitly saying so, or doing it through the lens of some fun, engaging, creative activity. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks. Well, I just want to say thank you to Julia and Joey. Also, and wanted to point out one of the things that we're sorry, I always get emotional when I'm expressing my gratitude. So sorry about that. But I'm so happy to be able to have both people like Joey, that you have this depth of experience, and also Julia, someone who's just beginning. So thank you for that. And thanks for all of you for being here, and really appreciate your work. And we'll keep us posted on what things are important to you for us to be thinking about, and we'll try to respond and continue to offer these conversations. Super grateful to each of you and your work.
Thank you for having me. And I just want all you guys to know I'm available. I do wear multiple hats, so sometimes it's hard to track me down, but I will eventually respond. And I do want to support any of you guys in any of the transitions, because this is near and dear to my heart. And like all of you guys, I just want to help people. So let me know. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. And we'll make sure that everyone has communication or contact information as we follow up. All right. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.